Fun fact number 65. Nose is still a little pug, so pardon me. But if you've been following, I read Chapter 1 of Children of Light, and I am now going to read Chapter 2. It's really quite a popular chapter when I first wrote it, and I think it's still one of the favorite chapters of the book. It's called Celia's Story, and I'm going to read. Running Tree, why has the council chosen me? Don't get me wrong, I'm very excited to be the chosen one for Mission W, but I am a criminal. Are you sure you want a criminal assigned to one of your most important and precarious missions? Are you sure this is not some kind of mistake that you will pull away from me at the last minute like a ripe piece of pineapple dripping with sweetness that I'll never be able to taste? But the memory will haunt me all my life. You would not wound me so, would you? I am frightened that this is a sleeping picture in my mind, that when I wake the honor will only be a cloud full of sunshine that passes my soul and illuminates another. I know you do not wish to speak often, but you are the only counsel that would wake my mind to reality. Please tell. Her pleading echoed in the great hall. The tall, dark figure of Running Tree glided towards her like the wind. She looked up at the towering man with the long gray hair and sober expression and deep, still eyes. He touched her shoulder with his huge hand and bent over her left shoulder and whispered in her ear one word that had filled her dreams and was the soul of her heart. But she had never thought of the word in that way until she heard it spoken from the depths of the earth and echoed on the wind as Running Tree conveyed the word, wings. Wings. The word made no sense at all, and all sense at once to Celia. She then knew that this was no passing illusion, but a bright and shining reality. The tears ran down her face like an orphan child's when she realizes that she has finally found a home, and that someone actually cares for her and loves her deeply with their whole heart. That it is possible for someone to love them, and this can never be taken from them, and that there are still more orphans left who will never know this essential truth. The tears were warm and long traveled from a 5-year-old girl who now at 20 finally released the tears of all those years and held on tight to the long robes of the ancient man who had given her wings. Her fear was gone. She was ready to leave for the space station on the designated date, which was only a week away. What a birthday present. She was more than lucky to be picked at all for Mission W out of all the qualified women who tested for the mission and passed. They were all beautiful women. Most were extremely intelligent. Celia had hated the testing. She loved the test. She just hated having to see all her competitors and how well or poor they did. Even though her competition was astounding and the mission was dangerous, Celia had to be picked. She couldn't stay on Earth any longer. Her family, all her family, even distant relatives, had been killed in the civil disturbances in Brazil. It was the 3rd year of the Civil War all over the planet. Few countries survived the devastation, but even some of the peaceful countries were touched by the atrocities created by the massive disturbances. She was only 5 in the 3rd year of the disturbances when she lost her family. She remembered searching through the pieces of what was once her family's home, desperately trying to recover anything, perhaps her favorite doll, but instead she found pieces of her mother and father and brother and sister, an arm here, an eye or ear there. She decided to run away from home that day because she had a fight with her older sister, who was 8 at the time. She had hitched a ride in a People's Protection truck and told them she was an orphan and that she had relatives living on the ocean. She played by the ocean until it grew dark. All day her mind was full of thoughts of the death of her family. She was wishing that they were dead because she had been punished because of the fight with her sister, when, in her young eyes, it was all her sister's fault. But as it grew cold on the beach, she longed for the comfort of her mother's arms. It was only 30 miles back to town from the beach and about 10 more miles to her parents' home. She started walking. That's when she saw the beautiful lights in the sky. The town was being sprinkled with bombs. She thought they were beautiful and didn't understand the meaning they brought to the town. She had seen other towns in the distance alight with bombs and thought that the stars were falling to make the people happy again. The sound had startled her, but she figured that may be the way that stars talked. A People's Protection truck and ambulance came by and picked Celia up and took her back to town. As she approached the town, she saw the devastation and didn't understand. The truck drove her right to her house. She stood, a singular shadow, in shock. She shook all over and then fell on the ground. It was her fault. Her wish had come true. She ran around calling for her mother, seeking comfort in any sign of what she knew to be home. All she found were pieces. In the morning, the People's Rescue Crew found Celia sitting in the middle of what was once her house, her mother's arms around her. They had a hard time getting the arms away from her. But when they did, Celia collapsed like the arms were the only things keeping her conscious and holding her up. She spent much of her young life with the rescue crew until she was 10 years old. She helped rescue as many people as she could from the rubble of lost towns and cities. Then the disturbances ended. She had nowhere to go. One of the rescue crew members saw the little girl's intelligence and saw that the time had come to send her away. He applied to Japan for entry of the young girl into the school, what was soon to be known as part of the Eastern Continent. He explained Celia's circumstances and education. She was accepted and shipped off across the earth. When her education was completed, Celia applied for the space program. She moved to Wester City on North Continent and worked for the environmental program and then as a chef. She had gone to school for 6 straight years. By the time she was 18, she was notorious. Her reputation came from the fact that she never cared or liked other women. She found most women to be inadequate. Sykes had told her that it stemmed from her own feelings of inadequacy and perhaps blaming her sister and herself for the loss of all that she knew as reality when she was 5. She thought all Sykes were full of shit. Most of them were women anyway. The day after she turned 18, she applied for Mission W. She was accepted for testing a week later. There were physical, mental, and written tests to take. The testing took 6 months. When she had heard that she had made the final 10 round of testing, she went out and got drunk. The next week, there were more tests. A year went by, and she had heard nothing. Someone of the final 10 women had been picked, and she knew it was over. She knew she would never get picked. Her fears took over. Celia had many men, but her favorite was Jace. He was her man. Even though she could fool around with many men, she expected her men to be faithful to her. But she had given up all men for Jace. Celia liked men, unlike her distaste for women, but she felt she couldn't trust men and became very jealous when they mentioned or were near other women. She flipped out. More than once, a woman or a man would find themselves without hair or a finger because they had been mentioned by one of her men, or the men themselves seen talking to another woman. But the worst incident happened the week the 10 final women were to be notified as to which woman would be chosen for Mission Z. Celia needed to be chosen because she could not live with herself any longer on Earth with women, and her jealousy, and the way she felt about men when other women were around. She knew she was no good to the planet and no good to herself if she couldn't leave the Earth. She would eventually destroy those she loved and herself. The most violent incident happened the night before all the women would be summoned to the council and told the final decision. Celia got drunk again that night and went to Jason's apartment, possibly for the last time, but she needed him more than he knew. She found him in bed with another woman and almost killed them both. Luckily, her man had a guard dog that stopped her rage before it was too late and bit her shoulder, leaving a neat set of puncture wounds that made an arc on both sides of her shoulder, which finally rendered her unconscious. The council had found her in jail 2 days later, with her wounds healing. The announcement had been made without her. She had a private meeting with the council where she was given wigs. The men on the space station knew bits and pieces of her life, but not the entire truth. They respected her too much to pry into the dark waters of her past. Contrary to the council's original belief that a woman would detract from the men's productivity, the men became more constructive, worked harder, and did anything to please Celia, because she pleased them so well. That is how the true first prototype droid was made. The men modeled her after Celia and named her after their model, Celia too. She could never measure up to the original, but when they presented the droid to Celia on her 30th birthday, she cried. The first time she had ever cried in the 10 years she'd been with the boys. Thus, 5 years later, the droid for Mission Z was Celia 2, much improved, but perhaps with a Celia soul. Can things have souls? I will answer that later in our story, little ones. Please do not interrupt until I am done. And that is Chapter 2, Celia's story. And fun fact, blah blah blah, 65. Ciao, Bellas.